Welcome to the Spiritual Sanctuary, where we come together every Sunday as a community to share spiritual teachings as both students and teachers of everything related to God, divinity, ascension, 5D consciousness, and the law of attraction. My name is Liza Dovgish. I'm a manifestation mindset coach.
And my name is Lara Michelle Gray. I'm a spiritual mentor, intuitive healer, and life coach. And to start out this episode, I would like to take 3 deep breaths together just to create divine alignment. So on my count, 3, 2, 1, inhale. And exhale. Inhale. And exhale. And one last time, take a deep inhale. And exhale. All right, beautiful. Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. This is the episode that we have been talking about, hyping up, that we have been waiting for.
For a while.
We have Mr. Aaron Abke himself as a guest on today's episode. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks for having me, guys. I've been looking forward to it.
Yes, I've been so excited for this. I've been telling my friends about it. Definitely, we're big fans of your YouTube channel. So Aaron has a YouTube channel. He has a podcast. What else do you do?
I run a couple programs. I have a Course in Miracles program, and then I have like an 8-week master class that just goes year round. So I do a lot of one-on-one work in addition to all the content creation and stuff like that. So it's really fun.
That was sweet. Yeah, I didn't know that you did any one-on-one. Is that kind of like coaching?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's not one-on-one in the sense of like private sessions with people, but we do like Q&A calls every Saturday, and people come on live, and I do a lot of engaging in the groups, answering questions and stuff. So it's cool to have some real hands-on time with people as well, because just doing content after a while can make it, you feel distant from people,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah. So,
all right. I think that, go ahead, Lau.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to say, everybody definitely go check out Aaron's stuff. Like, I always recommend you to all of my clients, and they love you. And I had a client the other day, he was like, thank you so much for introducing me to Aaron Abke. I've just been binge watching his videos for hours. I was like, yes, I can relate. Me too.
Everybody always says they binge my stuff. It's so funny.
Because it's so good. You're like
easy to binge.
Yeah, you're easy to
binge. Yeah, it's funny because I'll recommend you to all of my male clients specifically, because I think you have a very grounding masculine energy that's I think is nice for people to try and aspire to. So yeah, I definitely do that. But I think that let's start out with talking about your background with religion and spirituality, because the whole reason we started this podcast is because we want to bridge the gap between religion and these new age spiritual concepts, and kind of let people know that it's okay to have a mix of both. It's not a this or that. You can integrate both of them and create a beautiful practice that works for every single person. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of going into your experience.
Yeah, I'm right there with you guys on that. That's been a big passion of mine for years now, of how to bring people who have been in religion for so long into higher consciousness, because I think there's such an important aspect that religion gives to spirituality, which is like the symbolism, the icons, the stories, the metaphors. The Christ story to me continues to be incredibly inspiring, and more so every day, because these eternal truths that we talk about in spirituality can't really be explained in words. I mean, it's good to talk about them, and we can do some justice, I guess. But at the end of the day, like what we're pointing to is so beyond concepts and ideas that I think it is helpful to have symbology and metaphor and icons like Christ or Buddha or whatever it may be, to really capture the essence, the inspiration of the divine in ways that words can't do alone. So when I left Christianity, I never wanted to just throw away all the symbology with the dogma, baby out with the bathwater, as they say, because I knew that there's so much gold there to be rescued. But it just took me some time to step away from the symbolisms that I had worshipped and used for my whole life, to go on a different path, Eastern philosophy and other religions and perspectives. And then after years of that, coming back to the symbols I grew up with and just like, oh, wow, completely new, revitalized with so much more meaning and with depth. And now it's like, I want to help give that to the world through all the different series I do on YouTube. So it's really fun for me, and it's a huge passion of mine.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah. So something I'm really curious about is, what was the shift for you? Is there anything big that happened, anything major? Because you've talked a little bit about this, obviously, on your channel, about how your father's a pastor, how you grew up wanting to become a pastor, you went to school for this. So when did that change happen where you, what was the realization for you where it was like, I don't know if this is my path. I don't know if I align with this truth that I've been taught anymore.
Yeah. It's always interesting to look back at your journey with fresh eyes, right? Because when you're in it, it's very different than how it feels when you look back at it. So it was a slow process, of course, but I try to think about what was the first thing I really began questioning. And I have distinct memories of being 18 years old and reading certain passages in the Bible that just made me scratch my head and just almost have a moment of fear of oh, is this all bullshit? Am I fooling myself, believing this? And one of them, ironically, was the story of, you guys might know, Abraham and God have this conversation about if God will spare, I think Sodom and Gomorrah is the city they're talking about, but Abraham is like, I beseech thee, Lord, if I find 50 righteous people in the city, will thy save it? And God's like, fine, if you find 50 righteous people, I will save the city. And Abraham's like, thanks so much, God. But what about 40 people? And God's like, okay, fine. If there's 40 people, and they go 40, 30, 20, 10, all the way down to 1. And it's sort of, you get this feeling of what's that movie, James and the Beanstalk, where he's talking to the giant. It's this big dumb oaf. Mm-hmm. And it's he's obviously could get squished by the giant easily, but he can outwit the giant. So he talks the giant into helping him and stuff. That's how the feeling I got from the passage is God's this big dumb giant who Abraham is outsmarting, right, to not destroy the city. And I just went oh, I don't get a good feeling from that. And I would read other passages like Jonah. There's this really funny passage where it's the very end of the book of Jonah. And Jonah's looking out at this city that God sent him to, Nineveh, to preach the gospel to Nineveh. And it's this horrible, wicked city or whatever. And Jonah's up on this hill overlooking the city and God, why did you send me to this horrible place? And God's like, look upon the land, Jonah. Look at all these people. That should I not spare all these people? And furthermore, look at all the livestock that they have. Should I not spare the livestock? And I caught that oh, this is an ancient world view of God. God doesn't give a shit about livestock in our day and age. There's no livestock. We have technology and stuff. That's way more important to our civilization. But back then, livestock was their technology. So that was the thing that God cared about. So even as a teenager, right, I was looking at the Bible through these lenses and going, oh, something's off here. But let me just sweep that under the rug. Mm-hmm. And so it really wasn't until my first church job after I graduated college where I was working in a church that was very fundamentalist. So I was forced to wrestle with these doctrines that everyone's talking about all the time. And the first one that went for me was the rapture. And I read some books about how the rapture is not actually in the Bible. And so I became this radical progressive Christian who doesn't believe in the rapture. And that really bothered all my Christian friends. But I still was a Christian in my heart, right? But then hell was the next thing. And I couldn't, it never sat right with me. This is just the ultimate contradiction that a God of love would do this. Right. So then I tried to look at how can I explain this away using the Bible, because I wasn't ready to give the Bible up yet. And then after that, it was okay, maybe the Bible isn't inerrant. And slowly each belief just kind of fell away for me. And at some point I was working at this church and I just went, okay, look, I don't believe in the rapture. I don't believe in hell. I don't believe the Bible's inerrant. This is what these people hang their hats on every day. Can I really consider myself in league with them? Am I really a Christian like they are? And so life put me in a position slowly but surely, kind of backing me into a corner and was hey, do you believe in this version of God or not, bro? And I had to be okay, fine, I don't. And it was this really scary decision.
Yeah.
But I had to make it at some point. The internal conflict was so great. And at that point, once the conflict created inside me was greater than the fear of leaving my religion, that's when the switch was finally made.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah. One big thing that comes to mind for me, like that I've almost, I guess, struggled with. I don't know the Bible that well, but I do always try to find truth in it. You know what I mean? Like I go to church every Sunday, not necessarily because I align with Christianity that deeply, but it's a way for me to get a great message. And sometimes the message feels more aligned. And like Liza and I were talking about this last week, sometimes it's almost like you have to put your own filter on as you're receiving the message, and you have to like recalculate it in your house. Like,
to this and
like
this
what are
really
they really saying? Exactly. So something that I've always kind of thought about was like the Old Testament, because I feel like there's so much in the Old Testament going back like all the way to the story of Adam and Eve. Like I remember reading that, and it almost made me laugh a little bit that God was like, and you're going to be like a serpent, you're going to crawl on the ground as your punishment. And I was like, that poor snake, you know, like it didn't make any sense to me. So kind of what are your thoughts on finding truth within the Old Testament? How much of it feels true for you? Where do you think it comes from? Where does it originate from? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, this is the fun conversation. This is where you get to be nuanced in your thinking, right? Like to me, it's so boring to be like, oh, the Bible's bullshit. I threw it in the trash when I left Christianity. It means nothing. Like that's such a unnuanced way of looking at it. Like this is a library of ancient books that were written by many different people over thousands of years that speaks deeply to the human condition and the questions that we as humans wrestle with. Why do we exist? If God is loving, why is there evil? And we're watching, as we read the Bible, we're watching this, really amazing unfolding narrative of how the human mind was evolving. And if we just can get out of this rigid structure of literalism, and it has to be literally true, and we do away with that filter, as Liza was just saying, we use a new filter to say, okay, this is just an unfolding narrative about the evolution of human consciousness. Read it through that lens, all of a sudden it's exploding with meaning. And really these stories of like Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark, they're archetypal, right? They have so much to say about the human condition and wrestling with the light and the dark and guilt and sin and freedom. And so I see that in the Adam and Eve story in so many ways. And I even see a lot of actual evolution in that story. Like those people back then had no way of knowing that life evolves. So in their mind, there had to have been a first person at some point. So they just picture a story of the first person ever, Adam and Eve, and they're in a garden. The human mind idealizes it. But as the story goes on, they really describe how human consciousness evolved in a very short little narrative, right? Self-awareness is born, which is depicted as that moment where they realize they're naked. So that self-awareness is born, and then all of a sudden what happens? They go hide. So separation from the creator is born through that self-awareness. And that's what happened in human consciousness, right? So the Adam and Eve story really is the human story, just told in a short little narrative. And when you see it that way, it's like a whole, like a metaphysical text all of a sudden.
Yeah, wow, that really definitely makes me look at it in a different light.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. I was laughing. I was like, wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Liza, do you have any questions about that story?
Not that specifically, but what I was thinking on was along the lines of what you were saying is finding truth in the Old Testament. I was more so wanted to know how, you said once you left Christianity, you kind of didn't want to be like, fuck the Bible, that all sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you find yourself kind of in your daily life integrating Christian practices, Christian beliefs, as well as merging them with, kind of some of your more new age beliefs?
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, it's all through the Christ lens, and reading the Bible through the Christ lens is,
I love that,
increasingly powerful. Yeah, as time goes on, as you know the Christ principle in yourself, and you read the Bible through that lens, you see, the Bible speaks of like everything's leading up to this omega point where the Savior comes in and liberates Israel. And of course, when that Savior showed up, as Jesus, it didn't look anything like they thought it would, because they were looking for a military savior who would come in on a stallion and conquer the Roman Empire and liberate the Jews again. And Jesus purposefully usurps that view of the savior by coming in on a donkey, which is like a symbol of nonviolence and non-threat. His feet were probably dragging on the ground as he's riding into the city. He's always making these, there's a term for them, almost like theater, like when he turns the money changers' tables over and stuff. He was sort of showing in dramatic fashion, like what his real message was. Because again, as we said in the beginning, like you can't just get up on a stool and talk about non-duality in first century Israel. Like no one's going to know what you're saying, and they're going to immediately call you a heretic and off with his head. So his whole mission would have been over in an afternoon if he did it that way. So instead, he uses stories and metaphors, and he really tells all of his truths in stories and parables, knowing that whatever minds are ready to hear these truths, it will land on good soil. It will sink in deep, right? And if they're not ready, it'll just be a story that they won't understand what I was talking about. So that way I don't get executed, but also people can have a chance to hear these eternal truths. And that's the mystery of Christ to me, is that somehow in first century Israel, a very dualistic, very monotheistic society, some guy became totally self-realized and was in this almost hilarious like position of like, how do I talk about the most taboo thing possible to this culture without getting murdered instantly? And so to his credit, he made it like 3.5 years, which is really impressive. But really it was because he spoke from that state, from that place. He spoke as that universal Christ, knowing that truly the only way to teach it is to embody it, right? That universal love. And that's why he gathered such a huge following. And so it's amazing to read the Old Testament, and there's all these prophecies of the Savior, which again are archetypal prophecies. It's like what liberates the human mind from the bondage of suffering. And these Old Testament prophets will say, the lame will leap, the blind will see, the deaf will hear, the mute will speak in his presence. Talking about it's symbolizing this liberation from the human self, from the body, from body consciousness. And then, of course, we have that ultimate sort of display of transcending body consciousness through the crucifixion and the resurrection, which to me, in a deeper way, symbolizes, of course, all of us. It's like the journey of the soul that we all, if we want to escape this realm of experience and go on to the next phase of evolution, we have to transcend body consciousness, right? We have to die to the false self and be resurrected to the Christ self, the universal self. And so Jesus, the story of Jesus kind of, he walks the path for us and shows us how to do it. And that's what he means when he says, I am the way. It's like, I'm showing you the way that you all must walk. You all must be resurrected into this truth as I am. It's pretty amazing.
That is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So when you look at Jesus, do you look at him as having a purpose in the sense that it was 100% meant for him to be there? It was aligned for him to be there. That was his purpose. Like he is in that sense the savior because he came to show us the path that obviously catapulted a lot of people. It also created this narrative that we're in right now, obviously spiritual oppression. But do you feel like that really was his purpose and everything everything happened the way it was supposed to? Or do you feel like he was more so just a really awakened soul that just happened to bring this bigger message? I mean, I guess I feel like nothing's really a coincidence. Like obviously they can go hand in hand, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I very much do think that he absolutely knew what his soul's mission was. And I think that because, we can't know for sure if the words attributed to Jesus are totally accurate or not, but it seems to me that they probably are because of the unique phrases and sayings that are attributed to him. I don't think, like when people say, I don't know if Jesus ever existed, he's probably some made up guy. I'm like, well, you don't know much about spirituality then, because whoever made up this guy must have been a self-realized master to be able to package these amazing truths in these ways. And just the way he delivers them, it's like nobody who's not at a very high level of consciousness could come up with this. And so if someone did make it up, it's like, why would some ascended master lie about some guy that never existed? That doesn't make sense either. So to me, it makes the most sense that it probably was a self-realized guy in first century Israel. And the words that he says, especially leading up to the crucifixion, It's like the hour has not yet come. My time has not yet come. For this reason, I was born into the world. He was a very intelligent person, obviously. I think he knew, just logically speaking, like he's not going to get away with this for too long in this culture. I mean, this is what they did back then. They kind of, like we all love to witch hunt for Nazis now, and everyone's a racist now because the ego just loves to claim those things about others and cast judgment and take them to the guillotine. It's like we're living in this day and age now where everyone's kind of hanging around the guillotine waiting to execute more people. That's the day and age Jesus lived in times 10, right? In religion. Like we think it's bad now. It was way worse back then. They would stone you on the street, literally, if they thought you said something heretical. So he obviously knew that his time was going to be limited. But I think in a deeper metaphysical way too, he knew that his soul came here to give this message, to help awaken this very unawakened civilization in first century Israel that was kind of trapped in this monotheistic religion. You know, the story of Israel is not a pretty story. I mean, they just were going through the same karmic lessons again and again, getting enslaved in captivity again and again, and waiting for their God to come and save them, which of course isn't how it works. You got to save yourself. And so I think Jesus's soul probably from the astral realm saw this predicament, saw a huge opportunity to be of service to others and really to propel humanity forward from third density to fourth density consciousness, which Christ absolutely did, right? We literally call it Christ consciousness now because of the message of that universal love that he displayed. So I think he knew all along what his soul's mission was, to be a martyr for this message, which would be the ultimate way of displaying that message, right?
Just took a little bit longer.
I like the way
maybe.
You put it too, because you say, yeah. I like the way you put it too, because you say that he saw it, right, as an opportunity. Because I think in the Christian faith, it's very much like God sent him on this path, and here is your journey, which is still the case on some level, but it still puts some accountability. It doesn't just see Jesus as like as just a tool, like he was as much of the journey, as much of the story as God was.
Yeah, like he wasn't sent down here to do God's dirty work or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you read the Bible, to what extent do you feel like parts of it are untrue? Like, do you take everything and do you find the deeper meaning in everything, or are there parts of it where you're like, okay, this is more so human error, human ego? I mean, like Liza and I talk about this a lot. I'm very fascinated with the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and the way that that's not part of the Bible, and many other gospels that haven't been included in the Bible. And so how it's very much been manipulated and censored. And like we said, it's been through many layers of human ego and human perception. So I feel like in that sense, the Bible is already flawed. Do you see those flaws in them and kind of skip over them? Or are you like, no, I like take it completely and I can see every single part of it through that Christ consciousness and find truth in it?
Yeah, great question. I think that is kind of that unnuanced view I was talking about that I had at one point for a few years' time. And I think if you want to keep seeking truth, you will grow out of that point of view and come back full circle and see, oh no, everything in this book is true, just true from the perspective it was written from. So I don't read, Leviticus or something where they're talking about how God wants his animal sacrifices. I don't read that as, oh, that's literally true. I read that as that was the level of consciousness those people had about God. And if you can get into that, then you can see the progression happening where you get to the prophets, halfway through the Old Testament or so. And the narrative, the understanding starts evolving where they start saying, actually, God doesn't delight in these animal sacrifices. Take away from me the smoke from your altars and the noise of your music. I despise these things. My sacrifices are a broken and contrite spirit, a desire for me, a zeal for my house. The prophets start saying this stuff. And you're like, ooh, that's a really radical, progressive message for back then. If you can get into that culture and see it from that reference frame, you're like, wow, that's an amazing evolution to happen in that culture. I wonder how shocking that was for people, how scandalous that was when that system of animal sacrifice was all they knew, right? So if you just look at it from this like, oh, animal sacrifices are dumb, we don't do that anymore, you'll miss all of that, right? And then if you can see it back then, you can see it happening now. You can see it also happening in our own modern day and age, in our own political climate. The evolution of consciousness is always happening, right? And that's where divinity is. That's where the mystery is. That's where the aliveness is. And that's where I want to be. I want to be in that evolution. So the arrogance of the ego is to try and take some high viewpoint, say, oh, I'm superior to that now. And that's okay. That's what we do when we leave religion. But we don't want to hang out there because it just creates cynicism and it doesn't lead anywhere that's expansive.
Wow, I love that a lot. Liza, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I wanted to completely shift focus, unless you want to stay on this topic.
Oh, I just have one last question about that. Have you read Mary Magdalene's Gospel?
Oh yeah.
So what are your feelings about her, and kind of more like seeing her as maybe the almost feminine energy, the balance to Jesus, and maybe also their relationship? Do you feel like they had an intimate human relationship, or do you feel like it was very much just written about that way, but it was more of like a spiritual giving?
Yeah, I do kind of lean towards the theory that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were probably married. I don't know what the dynamics would have been like with, Jesus kind of being a guru figure and having disciples, and if that was like taboo back then or not. But I actually don't think that just because of the Gospel of Mary, but actually because of there was a certain discovery that was made in Jerusalem or somewhere in Israel, like in 2008 or 2010. They were looking for Jesus's family's birth tomb place, because they used to have like tombs they would bury the whole family in. And I don't remember exactly how it happened, but they stumbled upon this cave, this tomb cave underneath it was underneath an apartment complex somewhere in Jerusalem. And it had all the bone boxes of all of Jesus's, sketched into the bone boxes like they would, carbon dated back first century. And it had all the names of Jesus's brothers as listed in the Gospels. And it even had one of his brothers' names that only appears in the Gospel of Mark. And it's written differently. I can't remember what the name is, but it's different than it appears in Matthew and in Luke. And it's written as it's written in the Gospel of Mark, which is the oldest of those four canonical Gospels. And next to it says Yeshua. Next to that, Mary of Magdala. And then they had a son, a bone box of their son. I think it was Joseph or something like that. Anyway, all the bones had been stolen, over the centuries and stuff like that. But they found this amazing site, and they were like, oh my gosh, like I think we found the actual tomb of Jesus's family. And then the Jewish authorities find this team of researchers down there and say, hey, this is against our law. You're not allowed to go into graves. So they covered it up, they sealed it, and they said, you can never go back down here again. And it was just like this horrible tragedy that, imagine the implications of if this got out and we found out that Jesus was married, had a child. That would radically alter Christianity, I think, in a very good way in the long term. Mm-hmm. But so I do think that they were probably married for a lot of reasons, but all those Gnostic Gospels are very fascinating to read because, they have a very different view of Jesus than even the canonical Gospels present. Not a contradictory version, but a much deeper version. Like they go into a lot of the cosmic Christ stuff that mystical Christians believe. And of course, that was censored from the Bible in 365 and all that, because very much empowering to the individual, which is not what they wanted back then when they were creating Christianity as a religion. So it makes sense that they weren't included, but I think everyone should read those Gnostic Gospels, if for no other reason than to just understand that like this one view of Jesus we've been handed from the Christian religion isn't probably how he was seen in 1st and 2nd century by his followers, right?
Yeah, I love that so much. And like, especially what you're saying with that giving the kind of the power back to yourself as an individual, because that's something I think is really powerful about Mary Magdalene's Gospel, is how the first 6 pages and the middle 4 pages have been destroyed or ripped out. And that
right.
In the middle 4 pages, the conversation leading up to it, where Christ says that I guess the eye with which we perceive spirit is like the eye of the heart, and it kind of like indicates that we have this deeper vision within ourselves that's like the vision of our soul, of our spirit and our heart. And like that's what I teach to everybody. It's like there's this there's something inside of you that knows what is true. And like, that is so powerful, because that switches that spiritual authority, right? Where it's like, now it's like church is like, they're the gatekeepers between us and God, and we have to go to them for answers. And it would completely shift everything if we were to realize that, no, actually we are the bridge between humanity and divinity, and we have that vision and that eye within ourselves.
Yeah, I think the same thing happens with, sorry. I think the same thing happens with, I was just telling Lau about my dad, and he's like really going through his awakening, and it's so fun seeing him go through it. But, you know, he's getting into all these different tools, into like sound healing and all this other stuff. And a lot of times I notice people as they awaken, and even, you know, in religion, it's like you were saying, seeing divinity and seeing the magic as being in these tools, as church being the magic, as, you know, your pastor being the magic, the Bible is the magic, or sound healing is the magic. And always I constantly have to remind people, I have to constantly remind people, this is an amplifier, right? That's all supplemental to what you need to create within yourself. So yeah, I love that y'all, you know, brought that up. So something that I want to touch on is kind of going into a more personal note with, as you have been making this transition, Aaron, you know, with where you are now, where you've been in the past. I mean, you've been in what people might consider like very extreme spaces, right? Extreme areas of belief. Like most people don't go into religion as deeply as you have, don't go into, you know, a lot of these new age spiritual concepts as you have. And that's part of being a light worker and being a way shower and things like that. But I want to hear about kind of how your relationships have shifted in that time, you know, especially with, I think your father is a pastor, or was a pastor, you know, how has that shifted in your relationships?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's shifted dramatically, but in all the right ways. It's been pretty amazing to see where I'm at right now, like with how my parents handle what I teach and the content I create. I would have never imagined they would be so embracing of it as they are now, but it's been as a result of the inner change that they witnessed in me, that they've said this themselves, like they just couldn't deny, as Jesus said, you know, a tree by its fruit, a bad tree can't bear good fruit, and a good tree can't bear bad fruit. And so especially my dad, even though he self-admittedly was very conflicted by me coming out saying, I don't believe in hell, I don't believe the Bible's inerrant, I don't believe Jesus was murdered for my sins and stuff like that. That was hard for him initially, but when he saw the change in me, the insecurities begin to vanish, the acceptance, the self-love, the love for others, and forgiveness of my past, and all these other hallmark things that Christ taught, you know, he increasingly couldn't deny that there was a good work happening in me. And that made him more and more open to what I was sharing. And then he said at some point he could listen to what I was sharing and go, you know, he's saying all the same stuff that like I preach from the Bible. He just uses different language for it. So yeah, they're very much like my biggest supporters now. And that's, you know, I can't put into words how much that means to me.
That's beautiful. Lisa, I'm happy you asked that question, because I was wanting to kind of ask the same thing. I think there's just so much power. And I had a conversation with my client about this last night, because she was asking me last week, she was like, yeah, I feel like I'm just going through this awakening, and like, I want my parents to go through it too. And they grew up, I think, within Catholicism. And she's like, I want them to go through it too. Like, how do I tell them to, how do I get them to, you know, have this stuff help them and change their life the way it changed mine. And I told her, it's like, it's not about trying to change other people. It's about accepting them where they're at on their path, loving them unconditionally, and then just trusting that your light will shine so brightly that it can't help but inspire and affect them. And then yesterday I hopped on a call with her, and she was like, yeah, I had this great conversation with my mom. I just completely let it go. And she just saw how happy I've been and how good I've been doing. And they got into this conversation about Catholicism and religion and what she believes in. And her mom was like, yeah, like I see that you're changing, and I want to change too. And so it's just so powerful to like you said, just show how much it's changed you rather than trying to change somebody else.
Yeah, you can't convince people of this stuff, and you can't convince anyone that their beliefs are wrong, right? That only strengthens their ego. So you got to be the message.
Definitely be the message. I love that so much. So I wanted to switch topics almost completely. This is almost like a selfish question a little bit, but I just want to talk about aliens for a second.
I know.
So
they're the same.
Yes.
I was about to be like, so aliens.
I have a question for you, which I really, really have for a while. I remember you made some videos on this, and I was like, oh, I should like DM him and ask him this question, but I don't know if he's gonna take the time to respond. Maybe you would have, but I didn't want to bother you. So thinking about kind of what the law of one speaks on, and maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but I feel like there's been this kind of consistent message that I've seen where aliens who like genuinely have our best interest at heart and want to help us, they do so by not interfering. They kind of like stay at a distance. They don't necessarily mingle with what we're doing, or I don't know to what extent that would be, but I feel like that's kind of the message. Like aliens who really care, they almost don't care. They just like let us go through our own evolutionary journey and they just leave us alone. And then aliens who might have more of a selfish part in it, who maybe want to get something from us, they're the ones that would interfere with us. And I was talking to my mom about this because she does ET healing work. So she I'm not even sure what species it is, but she has she channels them to do healing work for humans on Earth. And she always felt really aligned with that work. But recently, because she went to the seminar at this guy that kind of talked about that was like, just be cautious of what aliens you're interacting with and working with, because they might not have your best interest at heart. And the aliens that really want what's best for us, they don't really bother with us. They kind of just keep at a distance. And so that for her installed a lot of doubt, where she was no longer sure if she really was doing the best thing and if it really was an alignment. So I really would love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, Rob makes it pretty clear in the Law of One that positively polarized ETs, which are about 90% of them, they are very moved by the call of suffering of civilizations such as ours. They actually call them the brothers and sisters of sorrow, meaning those who are called to the sorrow of others. Like they feel it in their heart. So it's not that they're feelingless or careless. It's actually that they care so much about our evolution that they dare not contaminate it or mess it up by infringing. And these beings are just so much more advanced than we are in consciousness. They really understand the nature of evolution, in the same way that if we went to go study a group of zebras or something, we don't charge into the herd of zebras with binoculars and video cameras, and we don't try to teach them how to read and write. They're not able to do that. They don't have the capacity and consciousness for that. So to help them, we study them from a distance. We make sure that they almost don't even know that we're there. And if there is some kind of tragedy happening, like a calf gets injured, then we might, run in, grab the calf, do some medical procedures, drop it back off. But we care about their natural habitat and their state of evolution. And there's also something to be said for understanding that the universal mind is in control. And of course, we are part of that universal mind, but we don't need to get involved in the sense of we need to correct it. It's not going well. Something's gone wrong. The viewpoint of higher consciousness beings is that everything is giving the creator an understanding of itself. The successes and the beautiful things, as much as the tragedies and the calamities, right? The positive and the negative are both serving for that contrast. So they are very much eager to help us evolve to the extent that we are ready for it and want it of our own free will. But the thing about it is, until we reach a certain collective mass of one, knowing that they're here and accepting that they're here, and then two, wanting and asking for contact and for help from them, then they're not going to really come down and have too much interaction with us, because from their perspective, that would be an infringement. So what they are doing is they are gradually acclimating us to their presence, which the Law of One also talks about, that they, from Ra's point of view, they're trying to make us aware of infinity, meaning you are in an infinite universe. Your view of this thing is way too small, and we're going to help you expand your view of this thing you're in by showing up in mysterious ways. So we see all these UFO encounters that are really kind of rapidly increasing, in our current day and age, they're trying to demonstrate we are here. You can't deny we're here, but obviously we have no ill intentions, because if we did, surely by now we would have done something bad, right? So I kind of use an analogy to help people understand of like what the relationship is like from their point of view. If you imagine being in like a dark cave or something with a frightened animal, and you wanted to prove to this animal that you have no bad intentions, you're on its side, you want to help it. How would you prove that to a very frightened animal? You'd probably pretty much ignore it, right? You would interact in the cave, you'd move around and do your business, letting it see you and have, experience you in some way, but without much interaction, because that shows I'm of no concern to you. I'm of no threat to you. And then once the scared animal starts approaching you, then you feel more appropriate to begin engaging with it and interacting with it. So you really kind of put the ball in the animal's court, right? In that same sense, the ball's in our court and we keep thinking it's in their court. Like, why don't they just show up and give us technology? It's like, no, it's totally the opposite.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for expanding on that. So with people who are currently like light workers, energy healers, or just anyone who's currently experiencing having direct contact with ETs or working with ETs, do you feel like there's still a balance there where, because I imagine almost, I know a lot of people talk about having past lives on different planets, and then maybe even being in contact with beings from that planetary system, and kind of having past life contracts, like soul contracts, to do things in this life on the planet Earth as a human,
right,
and to help them in that way. So do you feel like obviously everything's possible. Do you think there's still room there for that to be an inherently good thing, where that contact with the aliens isn't necessarily something that's selfish for them? Or do you feel like any kind of contact at this point that's outside of what you just described would be a little suspicious? Does that question make sense?
I think, I think they're very eager to communicate with us through thought. Not as much to come openly or have like physical interaction with us yet, which it does happen in rare cases, and that's happening more and more as well. But yeah, they want to communicate through thought because, one, that's their natural mode of communication anyway, and two, that's happening of our own free volition, right? We're channeling them, reaching out to them, and then the signal comes through. That's not an infringement of free will. So I think for that reason, channeling is going to continue being more and more important and more common. And I think that, when I try to think about like, how will contact evolve on our planet if I fast forward like 100 years or 500 years, however long it might take before we're like openly hanging out with ETs here. I think the way it will probably look is that more and more really profound channeled works like the Law of One will come through in time. And maybe even works that prove things in physics and science and mathematics that are very undeniable, that this couldn't have come from some person making it up in a channeling session. And then I think even a step beyond that, it makes sense to me that if these entities are ready for some open contact, appearing in their light body form or whatever that might look like, it'll probably happen to groups of people that are committed to this path, committed to making contact. I mean, they're definitely not going to show up to like world governors and leaders first. They're going to show up probably to people who are of higher consciousness, who are seeking the light and the love and are in that vibration with them. And I think that maybe whatever information or technology or help that they want to deliver will come through these different spiritual communities first. And then that will wake up world leaders, and people like that will actually maybe even come to these communities to say, hey, how do we have contact with these beings like you are? And we say, well, you got to evolve. You got to play it by their rules, right? They don't want to have communication with you if you're not in alignment with their view, right? They don't want to infringe on that. So that will rapidly increase the evolution of consciousness on our planet, obviously. And ultimately, that is their purpose, right? The reason they appear in our skies, the reason they deliver channeled works, it's really all to help aid in our collective evolution.
So do you think that there's any possibility of getting in contact with a malicious entity?
100%. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Happens all the time.
But I guess in that sense, you would just, it's again about the feeling. Like I think back to your Law of One material, and talking about like the demons quote unquote versus angels, and how if it's a lower vibrational entity or somebody who's polarized on the service to self path, there's going to be that feeling of fear with it. There's going to be that energy and emotion. So again, just for our listeners, you know, don't be scared and freaked out that you're going to be interacting with an evil entity, because you will be able to tell, because you'll know.
Yeah, I think it's something we've definitely talked about with how like light can't hide, you know, like you can't hide light within darkness, which is I think something you said one time, Lau, that I was like, that make a lot of sense.
I don't remember saying that, but if I said that,
you did.
Well, that was a great quote.
Well, no, because we were talking about how some clients like the whole reason we started this podcast, right? Like how people are like, oh, well, you know, new age spirituality is bad. I'm going to turn to Christ. And all of that is the devil. Crystals are the devil, like all these people. And then we were having that conversation and you said, yeah, well, light can't hide in darkness. So you can't really, you know, if something feels light, like if there's something that you're following that feels light, then there's no way that it can be dark. You'll definitely know that there's a malicious intent there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we were taught in Christianity, at least that I was taught, that, you know, the devil's under every rock, and like you can just sort of like, whoops, fell into witchcraft or something. Like it's that easy. Mm-hmm. And staying on the path of light is so difficult, and it's like treacherous, and it's narrow and perilous. And it's the opposite, right? It's like when you know the light, it's impossible to not see it when it's there, and it's impossible to mistake it when it's not there. So you have to know the light within yourself. You have to be intuitive. And so the people that get deceived by negative entities are, as Ra would put it, sort of spiritual neophytes. Maybe they're people who just come to spirituality and they're like, oh, channeling exists. We can talk to aliens. Let's do it. And they're just doing summoning rituals and stuff like that. That's when you can get into some problem areas where negative ETs will definitely take advantage of that. And they will try to take advantage of positive beings too, who they perceive might be gullible enough to trick, because they know how to speak the language, right? They're slick talkers. They know all the right things to say. The devil comes clothed as an angel of light, we say. So they come well dressed, very well spoken, very attractive to look at. And they know all the means of manipulation. So that, they never show up being like, I'm the villain in the movie and I'm here to convince you of my evil philosophy. Not at all, right? They're like, oh, I'm here in the name of the love and light, and let me tell you how to access that love and light. And they slowly introduce little distortions to it, little acts of service to self, right? And the best example of that is what Ra gives in the Old Testament with Moses and the 10 Commandments. Ra says that Yahweh was a positive social memory complex that was working with Moses and the Israelites to try and dictate the law of one to them. And in the beginning, Moses gets it right, where he says, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. It's like, you're doing good so far. But then a negative ET comes in apparently at some point and begins introducing little distortions, just to almost like little contaminants in the river that they know downstream are going to grow into really big problems. And that contaminant was the 10 Commandments of thou shalt not. So speaking in the name of Yahweh, of the Lord, they dictate, thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that, thou shalt not do this. And that's service to self. The service to others polarity would never tell somebody what to do or not to do, right? It's, we want you to seek the light of your own volition. So it's like, do what thou willst is the positive path, and do what I say is the negative path.
I love that so much. I love that you brought this up, because we were just talking about the 10 Commandments, Lau and I, recently, because I went on a date with this guy who's Christian, and he was just like, yeah, I just wish you would find Jesus, and he would just constantly list off the 10 Commandments. And I'd be like, I think I know Jesus better than you. Like, we're pretty tight.
Jesus is my homeboy, don't worry.
Yeah, he's the homeboy.
Because the commandments are all good things, right? It's like, love the Lord your God, do it. Don't kill people, don't do that. It's like, those are all good things, right? So it seems virtuous to tell people you should definitely love God, you should definitely not lie. But again, it's the commanding that's the infringement, and that's where the distortion is. So they're sneaky, man. They're crafty.
It is sneaky. I wouldn't have even Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that if you hadn't brought it up. So we have a little bit of time left, unless there's something, Lau, you want to bring up. I was going to ask one more question.
I was gonna say something about this. I also had one more question, so we'll rush through it. Yeah, so I love what you're talking about with them becoming disguised as light, because I think that any being that's more evolved than us can come to us and appear almost godlike, right? Because it's like,
Oh yeah,
it's a frequency that we're not used to, and so when it's so bright and so white, we're just like, oh wow, this must be God. And I did hear about an experience somebody had with this type of entity where I think that entity wanted something from them and they were like, no, like, I don't want to give that to you. And then slowly that energy started turning really, really angry and upset instead, and was like, just switched like that and was so angry, like, why won't you give it to me? And it was that realization of like, wow, like anything to our human perception, anything can appear godlike when it's bigger than what we are used to perceiving. And so I really like that you touched on that. So my question is that I thought, and I feel like I already have my answer to this, but I almost like just want to confirm my intuition. So when you think about baptism as a spiritual practice rather than how it's seen in the Bible or the Christian faith, what does baptism mean to you?
What a cool question. I've never been asked that. That's really
You're welcome.
cool. That's a really fun question. Yeah, it's similar to a lot of the practices from Eastern religions, like how people will go into Hinduism and they'll change their name, right? They'll give them like a Hindu name. And it's for this purpose of really trying to die to the old self and be raised to the new self, the true self. So they give them a name that means like Ram Dass, for example. His name was Richard Alpert. His guru gave him the name Ram Dass, which I can't remember exactly what it means, but it means something like a disciple of love or something like that. And so that becomes your new identity. And so it's just a way of helping the mind shift out of the old paradigm, out of the old person. And I think baptism is like the Christian version of that. It's a symbolic ritual that if done with the right intention of, I'm going under this water as the old identity, the ego goes down, the Christ comes out, right? It's the death and rebirth. I think if you do baptism with that in mind, it can be a very powerful catalyst, because anything can be a powerful catalyst if you bring desire and intention and willpower to it. Fasting is a really powerful spiritual practice of mine. Even sometimes using exercise, like really intense cardio sessions. I'll be in some kind of painful, 20 burpee set or something like that. I'm like, oh, I want to get out of here. I want to escape. And then I recognize the I want to escape voice is that same ego voice that's always antagonizing me when I'm feeling uncomfortable. So it's like, oh, can I love this pain? Can I love this situation and accept it? It's like everything can take you one step closer to enlightenment if you see it. And so baptism, is just another way of doing that.
I love that. Yeah, the way I always looked at it, ever since that question came to me, I was kind of trying to answer it for myself. And I do energy work. Obviously, I'm an energy healer. And so I do sometimes when I do shamanic journeying, I take my clients and I baptize them in this like pool in the center of earth. I take them down right into like this almost like crystal chamber at the heart of Mother Earth. And I like have this baptismal pool in there where I baptize. I've done it for Liza in the past. And it's really powerful and beautiful. And it is like, it's that energetic, like you said, you have to have the intention behind it, like that washing yourself clean from everything, right? Because that at the end of the day, it's like even with energy work, it is all intention at the end of the day. Like that's the biggest thing. It's like what intention are you putting behind it? What is your faith like that is actually happening? And so I think when people in Christianity get baptized, it's more of like, oh, I'm giving the power away, like this is going to do something magical for me, which it might still work, I guess, in that sense. But I feel like when you take the power back to yourself again and within you, and you know that this is cleansing you and you know what it's cleansing you of, it can become so much more powerful and intense.
Yes, that's where religion gets lost, is that they think the ritual itself has some kind of power. And of course it doesn't. Whether it's communion, baptism, or ancient rituals from ancient civilizations, they all are just different ways of providing a catalyst for the spirit, right, to grab onto it with its desire, with its intention. It's about what you bring to it, and the ritual is just a means to an end, right? And so religion, being very egotistical and dualistic in its thinking, gets obsessed with the objects and with the rituals, and that becomes the point of worship. And so, yeah, all of a sudden, all the rituals, sacrificing animals, praying, it all just becomes by rote. It becomes meaningless. It's devoid of power. And so then when we leave religion, again, we say, oh, those rituals are bad. They're useless. There's no point to them. But again, there's gold there. There is purpose there. If you bring the purpose to it, it can be a catalyst.
Yeah, exactly. I think we see the same example in New Age spirituality too, with these new moon rituals and
100%.
the journeying and the crystals and all these different things, right? I think it's the same thing wearing a different mask.
Yeah.
You know,
100%.
it's like constantly giving your power away and thinking that the power is outside of yourself and somehow you're going to gain power from doing this. That somehow you're going to take a shortcut. And that's definitely the biggest thing that it's funny because I was literally right before this interview having a conversation with the client, and she's getting towards the end of our coaching, and she was just sharing kind of everything she's going through, and I was asking her, well, what will be your biggest takeaway? You know, your biggest, like, give me top 3 takeaways. And she said, I think the biggest one would be making it personal, like realizing that when I'm, you know, manifesting or becoming aware of my thoughts or whatever, it's about who I'm becoming versus what I'm trying to get. It's about the process of actually aligning myself to that. I'm like, you got the secret. You know, you figured it out. I think that is an awesome place for us to end this episode. So Aaron, one last question. Who would you recommend we bring on the podcast, request to have on the podcast now that you kind of get our vibe?
Oh man, well, I always recommend my 2 good friends who are just amazing would be Jason Shirka or Alec Zek. Both of those guys are doing really awesome work right now, and they're really good guests to have on for sure.
Awesome. We will definitely reach out to them.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what projects are you working on that our listeners may be interested in?
Yeah, anything you want to plug?
Yeah, so I have a part 2 of my Remember I Am series coming up. See, it's April 2nd, so 10 days from now, April 12th. It's a free 4-week series. It's like a 4-week masterclass that I've put together that'll be on my YouTube channel for free.
Awesome.
I'm just putting my heart and soul into it for months now, so I'm really excited for that. Anyone can sign up. And then I have some other things in the works too that are really, really big, but I can't give those away just yet. But it's going to be a really exciting year for me, so I'm looking forward to it.
Wow,
Awesome.
I'm excited. Well, I'll definitely join you on the masterclass. And where can our listeners find you?
You can find me pretty much at the same link anywhere, whether it's YouTube or Instagram or my website. I'm just at Aaron Abke.
Yeah, and we'll have all of the links below as well for anyone that wants to check Aaron out, follow him on the platforms.
Yeah, but everybody should do that because that's...
Everybody go follow him. Great.
Seriously. All right, well, Aaron, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We really appreciate it. This has been my favorite episode. So yeah, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Awesome. All right. Bye, guys. Have an awesome Sunday.
Bye.